Scientific studies have finally proven that prayer does not work. Or more specifically, prayer has no measurable or meaningful impact on changing physical outcomes. And if you're surprised by this, it's because you didn't understand what Jesus meant when he said, "You will only receive the sign of Jonah." But before we get to that, let's address the problem with the underlying question here. You see, the question people asked was, does God answer prayer? And that's the wrong question. The question we need to ask is, why would God answer a prayer? Or for that matter, why would he choose not to answer a prayer? You see, people have a bad tendency of decoupling prayer from the very being that they're praying to. Now, here's what I mean. For a person to pray with any type of expectation of being answered means that you're presuming that there is a being who exists who is capable of holding every single timeline that exists in all of existence. Because bear in mind, for him to answer your prayer means to intervene on the current trajectory of reality. And every time you intervene, I mean, if there's anything science fiction has taught us, every time you intervene in the current trajectory of reality, you alter the trajectory of reality with oftentimes unintended effects. And so you would have to believe that this being exists outside of the timeline, is capable of keeping every single timeline in existence in his head across all time, past, present, and future, and then also has the power, because it's not just the intellect or the ability to see and view all these timelines, but also has the power to interject in our reality across a massive spectrum of circumstances, from healing to getting you the job that you're asking for, to fixing something in a relationship that you have, or in many cases influencing a set of multiple variables in such a way that they all align at the exact moment that you need him to show up and receive whatever the thing is that you're asking for. Like, the type of being that would have to exist for praying to even make sense in the first place would mean that you're dealing with a being that is so powerful, that is so intelligent, that is so beyond comprehension. Even the idea that we have any place whatsoever to petition that being to do anything for us is laughable. So when people come together, we're going to do a scientific test to evaluate whether or not this being that is so vastly superior to us in every possible way actually works or exists or interacts with our reality. Like, to think that that being exists and we're going to set up a test in order to capture him in action so that we can prove one way or another whether something that he has commanded us to do actually works is hilarious. You can't have it both ways. Either you believe that there is a being that is capable of answering prayer, at which point you would have to conclude that there is no scenario where you're ever going to be able to outsmart him and create a box where you're going to capture him in action so that you can prove him. It's like that's silliness. If the being that you would pray to with any expectation of him actually being capable of acting on your behalf exists, then you can't have it the other way and think that you're also smart enough to somehow catch him in the act. Which brings us to the obvious question: if that's the case, if we can't pray with any type of confidence that God is going to answer our prayer, then what's the point of praying? Now we're asking the right questions. So, underlying that question is a deeper question. Why would God choose to respond to one of our prayers? Whether yes or no, why would he choose to respond at all? And specifically, why would he encourage us to engage in this practice of prayer with him if he's not always going to answer the prayer, at least in the way that we might expect him to? Why would he encourage us to do this practice then if it's completely subjective, and it may happen sometimes and it may not happen sometimes, and sometimes we're not going to understand his answer, right? Like, it seems odd that he would encourage us to engage this practice without also providing some type of extreme confidence that it's going to produce material results. Because that's how we think about prayer, right? Why would I pray for something if I wasn't expecting God to act in my physical situation, right? If I wasn't expecting him to show up and change the physical outcome that I'm praying for, what would be the purpose of praying to him? What's even the benefit of prayer if it doesn't alter anything in my physical experience? You see, this is the problem with human reasoning. You see, we reason from a material level instead of reasoning from a spiritual level. And when you reason from a material level, everything is cause and effect. Everything has to fit within a cause and effect bubble. I asked, he showed up, he changed this thing in my material experience, therefore he exists, therefore he is good, therefore he loves me. This is the way that we reason, but this is false because that is an incorrect contextualization of the relationship that we have with God. So let's define the relationship. We all operate in one of two conditions. We are either God's creation, who is coming to the belief in his existence and then coming to trust in his intentions towards us so that we will desire to be his children, or we are his children who have placed our trust in him and we are learning to understand his ways. So, this is the lens that we then have to evaluate the motivation for why God might respond to one of our prayers. So, when you look at it through that lens, here's what you see. You see that at any given time for God to respond to one of our prayers, it would always be for one purpose, either to bring us to a greater understanding of who he is as his children, or to bring us to the condition that we trust both in his existence and his intentions towards us. That would be the only reason for him to ever respond to any of our prayers. Because you have to remember, God doesn't need anything from us. He needs nothing. He's perfectly complete without us. He didn't need to create us. He created us in love with the intention of making us his children. That's why we exist. That's the whole reason that all of creation exists, is for that purpose. God doesn't need our worship. He doesn't need our prayers. He doesn't need our humility. He doesn't need our love. He needs absolutely nothing from us, because if he needed something from us, he would not be God. So, for a God to exist, for us to pray to, we have to begin with understanding the concept that his motivations are not rooted in need, they are rather rooted in demonstration, which means that anytime he responds to one of our prayers, it is purposeful to an end. There is a demonstration that is occurring every time he responds to a prayer. And I use the word responds because we often make the mistake of thinking he didn't respond because his answer was no. Okay, so now let's take this from the conceptual to the practical. Now, I want you to imagine that there are 3 adult children in a room, and they are surrounding the hospital bed of a parent whose health is failing. One of the children currently believes in God, but it's conditional, and depending on how God responds to the situation is going to dictate whether they continue with that belief. One of the children currently believes in God wholeheartedly, and even though losing the parent would rock their faith severely, it wouldn't destroy their faith. The third child, on the other hand, doesn't believe in God at all. And it's going to require this moment of losing their parent to bring them to a place of utter brokenness where they finally recognize the fact that they can't do this life on their own and that they absolutely need him in every possible way if they're going to continue forward in any way, shape, or form. Now, here's what we know from Scripture. We know that the one lost sheep, the Lord will leave the flock to go and pursue that one lost sheep and bring them back. And so in this scenario, there's a good possibility that God may allow that person to pass in order to bring the one who doesn't currently believe, the lost sheep, to their absolute end so that they will recognize their absolute need for him. And he would be willing to sacrifice the one who is currently in a conditional relationship, which is not a relationship of love. Okay, so this is not a relationship where the person is following God because they love God. They're following God for the benefits that they get from it. That's not the conditions of our covenant. Our covenant is a love-based covenant, not a I do this and you give me that relationship. It's not conditional, it's covenantal. And then the third one, the one who currently loves him and whose faith will be rocked hard, but will be able to endure and survive it without losing their faith. He may allow the one who will make it, even though it will be difficult, to endure the difficulty of that loss to ensure that the one who actually can be saved isn't lost forever. You see, this is how we have to understand God's answering of prayer, his response to prayers. He responds to our prayers in accordance with how it's going to impact somebody's ability to come to him, trust him, and ultimately be saved out of the destruction that is imminent for all creation. Or put another way, the only reason that God responds to our prayers is for this purpose, to either result in the salvation of one who is lost, or to result in the increase of belief or the increase of trust of one who is already found. And if he chooses to say no, not respond, chooses to say no, or chooses to delay in responding to our prayer, it is always for the purpose of one of those two things, either to bring one who is lost to salvation or to increase the trust of one who is currently found. The problem is that because when we're in it, we can't see how him not responding the way that we want to is producing that result. And so we evaluate that he either isn't answering the prayer, or we evaluate that his answer is wrong, because how could he possibly let this wonderful child of his who loves him and has spent their whole life caring and following him and doing everything that he asked, how could he possibly let them endure such awful suffering of losing a parent when they've prayed wholeheartedly and they put their whole prayer group together and everybody got together and prayed for this parent, and all of this work went into trying to change the outcome, and then the outcome didn't change? How could he possibly let his child who he loves endure that extraordinary difficulty, except for that child is going to make it because their faith is already strong enough to do so? And the one who is currently lost would not make it at all if not for that event. And before you say to me that that just doesn't sound like good, like a good God wouldn't do that. Well, a good God allowed his own child to be sacrificed on a cross on behalf of a bunch of guilty people, just so that they would be able to know that he loves them and that his intentions towards them are good, and that they can trust him so that they can be saved. And so, yes, sometimes he will allow us as his children who are saved, who will make it, sometimes he will allow us to endure difficulty in order for one who isn't going to make it otherwise to make it. Now, is that always the reason? No, of course not. God's playing 50 bajillion D chess. Okay, he's got pieces moving all over the board everywhere all the time. Everything that he's doing is for purposes that are so far beyond our comprehension and understanding, it's absurd. But I'm giving you a view, an insight into one of the reasons that he may not respond to a prayer in the way that we expect him to. Just one. This is one of a multitude. But what this one does provide us with the fundamental understanding that underlies all of God's responses. Why is he responding to our prayers at all? It's for one of two reasons. It is either for the purpose of saving the one who is lost, or it is for the purpose of bolstering and building up the trust of one who is found. And when his response seems to do neither, that means that we have not yet been granted the revelation or the hindsight to understand how that moment, the way he responded, was going to produce that result in one way or another. And for some situations, we aren't going to find that out until we meet him. Some of them are just going to remain a mystery, and we're going to have to trust him. In my experience, oftentimes, if I ask, he'll tell me. And he'll show me whether it was for the sake of somebody else that I just wasn't aware of, or he'll show me how it bolstered my trust. More often than not, he has responded to me when I've asked for wisdom and revelation in those things. It was oftentimes many years after the experience, but as of yet, I can't think of a time that he was unwilling to share with me. But just because he doesn't mean he will always. He may choose not to share that with me until I meet him, and that has to be okay. Because again, I cannot pray or believe that there is a being for which I can pray to that has the ability and capacity to respond to my prayers without also taking the position that he is so far superior to me that he gets the right to say no, and that's got to be okay. So, did science prove that prayer doesn't work? Of course not. We just demonstrated that human beings have a level of hubris in us to actually believe that we could engage a God who is powerful enough to answer prayers from a timeless dimension on our own terms, which is why I said that they will only get the sign of Jonah. And what was that sign that the Lord said that the wicked and adulterous generation will receive? That sign is Christ raising again after 3 days to judge them. Because God gives grace to the humble, but he resists the proud.